Thank you, Debbie. Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this latest webinar for the NMIS Insights on Digital Transformation. So I'm Richard Millar. I'm the team lead for digital metrology within the NMIS group, and I would like to also introduce you to my co-presenter, Ian McKechnie, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Advanced Services Group. Just like to go through a few housekeeping sort of mentions as well. So this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. Your microphones and webcams will be turned off during the session to avoid background noise. You can type your questions throughout the session via the chat tool. Time will be allocated at the end for speakers to answer your questions. Please take some time to complete our survey that will be sent after the webinar. The National Manufacturing Institute Scotland is a group of industry-led manufacturing research and development facilities supported by a network of partners across Scotland, brought together to boost the manufacturing community. It is where industry, academia and the public sector work together on groundbreaking manufacturing research to transform productivity levels, make companies more competitive and boost the skills of our current and future workforce. Together, we are focused on revolutionising skills, productivity and innovation to help attract investment and make Scotland and the wider UK a global leader in advanced manufacturing. Our ambitions are to increase productivity by reducing barriers to innovation, grow the economy by galvanising investment, increasing manufacturing competitiveness within Scotland and internationally, catalyse job creation and strengthen supply chain links across the country, provide leadership, build collaborations and enhance capability to influence adaptation and exploit manufacturing opportunities to boost Scotland's transition to a net zero emissions economy by 2045. Inspire and attract talent and equip current and future workforces with the skills they and the manufacturing and engineering community need. We do this by working with manufacturing businesses of all sizes from across Scotland, the wider UK and beyond, making it easier for them to access innovative technologies and connecting them with our widespread national and international network of world-leading industry and academic experts and collaborators. Collaboration is at the heart of the NMIS. NMIS is growing out of the Scottish Government's Manufacturing Action Plan, published in February 2016. NMIS is an integral part of Making Scotland's Future programme. NMIS has been developed by a number of organisations working together, which you can see here. This group is collectively known as the One Scotland team. We are a community, a combination of core NMIS capability, specialist technology centres and an active capability network of partners in the manufacturing community. The NMIS group is Pan-Scotland. I would like now to pass you over to Ian McKechnie here to give us a brief introduction into the Centre of Excellence in Servitization.
Yeah, good morning and thank you, Richard. The gentleman that you see in the screen in front of you is Professor Tim Baines. Tim is our Executive Director and the Professor of Operations Strategy at Aston Business School. Academics are normally measured by the number of citations that their peer academics use in reference to their work. And Tim, we're very fortunate to have, is the #1 academic in the world for this term servitization and advanced services. I will explain a bit more about the definitions of servitization as we go, but Richard, if you can move to the next slide, please. I'll just explain a bit more about our centre. We're based in Aston Business School in Birmingham. We primarily drive the research agenda around this area of servitization, which really means adding services to support your product in use. And it's particularly relevant for manufacturing firms and what I would refer to as technology innovating firms, where they're perhaps creating software and maybe delivering software as a service. So we take the research, we offer programs to industry. So we've worked with in excess of 450 manufacturing firms. We create partnerships. We have a global partnership of 10 firms, all of whom are manufacturing firms with anywhere between $1 billion and 19 billion annual revenues. And we provide advisory support to firms that want to accelerate their own growth of services within the business. Next, please, Richard. I've provided just an example of some of the firms. The ones circled in blue are firms that have worked with us in the past. The ones circled in yellow are ones that are currently working with us. So we've got Thales from Paris looking at land and air systems. We've got Domino Printing Sciences, using barcodes. We've got Donaldson filters from the US and Madrid, providing filtration to the manufacturing OEMs. We've got Legrand to make electrical devices, and Bax to do domestic heating. But you'll see in amongst all of these, there's a smattering of SMEs that we'll work with, and I will provide some case studies at the end. But this is just to give you a sense of the kind of global reach of our work. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Ian. That was a very informative introduction. Thanks. So to begin with our webinar today, when we think about digital transformation, we can begin with what was recently coined within Germany around Industry 4, and how we use these 9 pillars to create a structure to digitalise manufacturing through data acquisition, combining Internet of Things and low-cost sensors, systems integration across multiple and disparate systems, and cybersecurity, data transference. So once we've acquired the data, how do we send it back to data storage point of view using advanced networking and connectivity solutions, which could be utilised through system integration, again, cloud computing and cybersecurity, data storage. So once we've actually acquired that data, where do we put it? What do we do with it? How do we, utilise it to learn more from it and add value to our business and our knowledge? Visualization. So how do we construct data into information to make quick decisions? So utilising different technology platforms such as augmented reality, virtual reality, model-based simulation, and web-based dashboards that allow you to access information from anywhere in the world. And obviously on top of all that, we have the data analytics and machine learning piece, where we want to actually utilize preventative strategies, as it were, to help us to sort of maintain operational effectiveness of our equipment. So when we think about the 9 pillars and then we put it into the ISA 95 framework to connect the enterprise within and beyond, we want to understand how we connect field devices and machines at the process layer, and how we start to pull data from those machines and utilities. And doing this, companies are starting to develop know-how and traceability of their processes and products. They also have the ability to manage and adapt shop floor production based on current status. The business at this point also needs to be considered really truly digitally transformed, and needs to integrate the office management systems such as ERP, CRM, MES solutions to be able to engage with customers and suppliers to help plan and monitor productivity in the manufacturing facility. So at this point, we are creating data and know-how, knowledge that can augment the tacit skill sets we have in the shop floor to actually produce and send something out into the world. And this data that's been created not only helps us understand what's going on in the factory in real time, but also helps us understand what the environmental impact there is as well. So we're really trying to start to tackle the net zero agenda and the challenge that's been set by Scottish and UK governments. And this information can be associated to products and processes to provide emissions information, which will be really important going forward for our customers and suppliers alike. So digital transformation, as I've said, not only pertains to manufacturing facilities and processes, but it also can be leveraged out to connected products that are being developed to understand the performance, life cycle analysis, and its potential for reuse through the use of advanced connectivity and networking solutions. By connecting these products and plant equipment, original equipment manufacturers or OEMs are able to visualize as close to real time its performance, utilization, and environment with no geographic boundaries. This allows companies of all sizes the potential to compete on a global stage. Companies can respond to downtime through remote maintenance support and advanced visualization solutions. Preventative maintenance strategies can be implemented to prevent major failures before they occur by acting on close to real-time data and machine learning data analytics solutions. This allows customers to move from a capital expenditure business model to a more operational excellence focused business, giving customers more value for money through greater operational efficiency and utilization of their assets. And it also allows suppliers who create and build and sell these products and processes to build upon its manufacturing know-how by offering advanced services through greater connectivity with the client and its equipment. And therefore, suppliers achieve greater value for know-how and capability to manage their own assets. And at this point, I would like to pass it over to Ian again to continue going through the servitization models.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Perhaps before I move on to the next slide, I'd just like to maybe share 2 reflections on your slides there, Richard. One is that you were looking at the data and the digital within the organisation. A lot of the work that we do is in the kind of digital space between the factory and the customer's use of that asset. So it's very complementary to it. The other thing I would say is that you'd mentioned that move from CapEx to OpEx. That tends to be very prevalent in our world, which actually allows a manufacturer to get more customer traction because they're reducing the barrier to entry, i.e. moving away that capital cost to make it easy to pay for it on a more longer term basis. So let me explain a bit more about servitization. Next, please, Richard. So this is the definition that we use as a research group. So servitization is really about the transformation process. So this is about the way that you move your business from being a product-led entity to a services-led entity where you are providing services around about the product. So creating more value. Advanced services are really more outcome-based activities where you're paying for the capability that you really need. So customers, in many cases, particularly with high value, large assets, don't really want to own them because they've got to then be responsible for their maintenance and their end of life. Whereas they're really looking for the capability that the machine might or the asset might provide them with. Next, please. So we refer to the services in very basic terms. We think of base services where you've got an asset and you might provide consumables like spares, oil, filters, belts, etc., just to make sure that the asset is available and running. The intermediate services is where we start to factor in things like scheduled maintenance or planned maintenance, where we're looking at maintaining the condition of the asset in use. Where we specialize is in the top area of these advanced services. And this tends to mean that the OEM retains ownership of the asset and provides the asset as a capability to their customer. It means that you enter into much longer term contracts. You get better value from the asset because it's the OEM manufacturer that is actually looking after it, and therefore, as they manufacture it, they're best placed to maintain it. This is where we see a significant uplift in the use of digital and data, because you have to understand the way that your customer is actually using that asset. Next, please. So we can position any manufacturing or technology innovating firm on this services staircase. So we're moving from the bottom where it's all about the product, that base level. You see the 3 layers above that where we're looking at these intermediate services. And I would highlight performance advisory services where it defines that thereby guiding the capture of more value from products. That's really where the role of digital plays a significant enabler. And in the top 3 are our advanced services, where you're starting to introduce the word guarantee, where you're guaranteeing the outcome from the product or from the business process or from the business platform. So in some cases, you find that manufacturers of assets will actually build the factory for their customer and they will run that factory because they understand how to make it the most efficient factory that they've got available. So we're interested in that top area, but firms of all shapes, sizes, sectors can work their way up this staircase just with a little bit of guidance. And you see in the right-hand side there that I've highlighted some of the benefits. As you move up that staircase, we start to see that you're really developing and delivering the capability that the customer needs, because the data is telling you that they'll use a certain percentage of the asset or a particular time of the day or for a particular purpose. And we see that that can help us understand how to reduce waste, how to increase uptime, i.e. OEE, as Richard expanded upon. And the Scandinavians see servitization as a way to dematerialize. So use digital to understand the asset in use and then miniaturize the asset. Next, please. So why should it matter? Next one, please, Richard. If you look at the gross domestic product of UK manufacturing versus GDP in UK services, you see this very familiar trend, a decrease over time in manufacturing and a perhaps comparable increase in the value of services. And what does that tell us? Well, it's really saying that we're seeing a drive towards the consumption of services. We see Uber, Netflix, etc., Airbnb. All of these entities don't own assets, but they do provide the capability that you're after as a consumer. But we would argue that we're not saying let go of manufacturing and move into services. What we're saying is use your manufacturing heritage and understanding and pedigree and add services through the support of digital to be able to deliver the product and the service. So I'm not saying one versus the other. We're saying bring both together and find ways to co-create more value for your customer, make them more successful. Next, please. The big elephant in the room. A lot of people don't know what servitization is, and when we do explain it, they don't know where to start. And where we help them where to start, they don't know how to do it. And that's why we created a research group about 12 years ago, was for the very purpose of taking the research about how this all happens and sharing it with industry. And that's why we run SME programs, why we run global programs. The tools and the frameworks and the models are all the same and they're easily attainable. We have guides. This one here is on engineering design for service. We make these guides available for firms to use. We have ones on things like performance advisory services. We make the step-by-step guide easily available because from a research perspective, it's in our interest to make sure that more manufacturers and technology innovating firms find ways to grow their revenues, particularly through services. Next, please, Richard. And again. So what we have here is a very simple framework. This is how we help firms create a new business model to become a more services-led organization. So we start in the top left-hand side where we're looking at this thing called a customer value proposition. Really what that means is we're looking at a particular segment of their market. We're looking at pains that the customer has. We're looking at ways where we think we can improve efficiencies and therefore provide gains to the customer. And we're also looking at the risks that we're happy to accept or the parameters that we would expect our asset to be used. But it's understanding that it's a merging of the asset use and the customer need and bringing two together in a very realistic way by adding services and wrapping that digital supporting around that program. I spend about 60% of my time in that top left-hand box with firms. And once we've got that nailed, we move to the top right-hand side, which is the value creation and delivery system. This is where we see the role of digital. So this is where we're looking at the skills of the people within the organization. We're looking at the digital, we're looking at the data collection, we're looking at the feedback loops, we're looking at design. This is all the internal capabilities that the customer have. And this is where NMIS plays such a significant role because they can help you with these things in that component. And again, we probably spend 10% of our time in that box. The next one I would take you to is the bottom left, the value proposition, the value capture process. And this is where we have 6 different types of revenue models identified that help you deliver the value to the customer. And it allows the customer to pay you in a way that adds actually value to them. And then we go to the bottom right, the competitive advantage. This is the reasons why we're helping firms move from CapEx to OpEx, making it easier for their customers to take the asset and use the capability. And again, these last 3 is all about 10% of the time. The additional 10% that's missing is perhaps 5% at the front end where we do some empathy mapping to do some brainstorming to understand the pains that the customer has with the asset. And at the end of it, once we've done with the competitive advantage, we do 5% in storytelling, where we bring together a story in 12 very simple steps that allow you as the user of that new business model to influence your board or executive team or your customers. Next, please. And again, just a visual example, services staircase map on the left, the customer value business model in the center. We've got created a digital tool that's freely available and the storytelling wheel on the right-hand side. Next, please. And This is how we support firms. So we take the research at the top left-hand side, we put that into publications and white papers and research academic journals, and then we cascade the learning down into what were the global partners. So I've highlighted some there, Domino, Baxi, Legrand. We've worked with these firms for, in some cases, 6 years, some 4 years, but in the main, it's about 6 years. And then we pilot and we test with these global firms. And once we've refined it, we will then share it with the volume of firms, which is the SME market. And you'll see it highlighted there, UV light technology, small SME providing ultraviolet light in medical applications, aerospace providing components and bespoke machining cells for the aerospace sector, where they're providing the glass factory, as they refer to their model, and Cool Mill is a rice milling factory. So you'll see that we have a cascade model, we share the research, we test, we validate, and we make it available through these mini guides and books that you can see at the bottom there. Next, please, Richard. And this is a tried and tested kind of flow process that we've used over the last 12 years. I've invested about 4.8 million of ERDF, which is European Regional Development money in the West Midlands, to test and refine the delivery model. So we start at the top. We have a little app we use called Unlock Your Insight, which helps us understand the kind of strategic bias of the firm. And I've provided a link to that at the end of the data. We do some empathy mapping, we do the pains and gains, we build the customer value proposition, and then we create the business model blueprint, which the firm can take away and use as their tool to drive their strategy and to use it as an internal communication tool to understand that all employees are facing the same way towards their customer. And we do some storytelling and we do some value network analysis, but ultimately, we like to create case studies, which informs research projects, and that provides a long-term relationship with the Advanced Services Group and ultimately economic impact. The model there, the 2 million that I've shared at the top there, has actually created 42.85 million of improved gross value add in the West Midlands. We're still evaluating the additional 2.8 million programme. But we believe that we will get about another 40 million from that program. So you can see the ROI from an investment perspective is very high. Next, please. Richard asked me to pick up on maybe some of the SME examples today, and you'll see the blue book there on the left, Servitization Applied. That was one that I wrote back in 2018. There's 30 SMEs in there, ranging from 11 to 125 employees. The average was 21, but you can see that from all different sectors. CHH Conex, you may see the green boxes at the end of a street or the avenue or a road where you have the fibre optic coming into the home for your digital. They create and design these platforms, and we help them move from a steel cabinet to a cabinet to allow Wi-Fi to get out, and they started using it as a charging point for electric vehicles. So they've done a huge amount on the digital by understanding how they could operate and think like a large company, no longer like an SME. Central Scanning, they had handheld 3D scanning equipment. Where we helped them get the best value was in the post-processing with data. They rented the handheld units out, but the companies didn't really understand how to get the best value from the digital data that was coming from the handheld scanners. So they started adding that as a service. UV Light, I've talked about them as a medical firm. Tactile at the bottom, data and cloud services. They've now moved into providing cybersecurity as a service. And the book was so successful that we've actually reprinted it and is now in the green colour that you can see there. And that's available on our website. Next, please, Richard. Some of the most recent case studies covering, if I can see Digio, Dignio is health sector. Alpha Drive, they're a machining company that retrofit and refit crushing machines for recycling industry. Interestingly, we helped them diversify slightly, and they've now provided a weapon management surrender service. So they use their design capability and their manufacturing capability to design and manufacture weapon bins for streets where weapons and guns and ammunition can be placed in them. And what they do is they map it, they log it, provide a record to the police, photograph it, and then they recycle everything because they've got the capabilities on site. And then they put the raw material back into the market again to be used in other ways. So a very positive story. They've taken in excess of 1,300 weapons off the West Midlands streets in 6 months. So just as an aside, but it all came from helping them understand their strengths and what a perhaps services business model might mean to them. And Cool Mill, I've talked about the rice milling machine, a Solihull West Midlands company. They provide support to their rice milling machines in China, Africa, and India. And they do that through the use of AR and VR, and they have managed to reduce the energy consumption by 90% compared to traditional rice milling methods. So a phenomenal story with 11 employees. Next, please, Richard. Again, we have a wealth of IP that we've collected over the years. Next, please. This is the transformation roadmap. So we use this with all the firms. You'll see moving left to right, we start in the green box, number 1, with exploration. So this is about where firms are trying to understand what servitization and advanced services are and what it might mean to them. Can they make money from it? What will it do to the customer relationship, etc. So we help with all the mini guides and the books and the case studies and the conversations. And then we help the firms move into the second phase, which is engagement. And this is where executives and individuals within the business start to get management buy-in to go and investigate what servitization is and what it might mean, and to start looking at designing pilots with the customers to see how they could move from purely providing the asset as a single sale transaction to providing the asset as a contracted long-term capability under a service contract. And once they get the data back and they understand the scaling potential, then they move into the third expansion phase. And this is where the scale comes, and they go from providing perhaps maybe 10 customers with services to 100 to 1,000 customers, etc., and then move globally. And ultimately, the fourth section there, exploitation, I don't tend to use the word exploitation obviously a negative connotation. This is about positive exploitation. This is about where you're really co-creating value with your customer. That intimacy is there. You're entwined. You are undistinguishable from your customer because of the way that you operate. So that roadmap there you see is not everything you will experience, but many of the things that our customers and clients have experienced as they've moved from providing just products to providing products and services. Now, why Richard and I, Debbie and Laura are here today is really the 4 cardinal compass points that you see on this roadmap. In the north, we've got market-centric forces. This is about looking out for customers that are looking for you to do more for them. And it happens, and your salespeople and your marketing people are the best, perhaps, feedback loop. And it's also about going out and visiting the customer and finding out the pains. You know, when was the last time a lot of you actually went out and sat with a customer? It tends to be that you get bogged down in the business and you don't tend to have that luxury. But the digital and the data all come from this southern point, the technology-centric forces. This is where digital plays a significant role in the enabling of the value to be passed to the customer. So this is where you're introducing sensors, but you know the cost of sensors now is pennies. So using sensors to understand the performance of the data, the performance of the asset, when it's been used, the conditions it's been used under, the temperature, the noise, the vibrations, etc., etc. Using the sensors and digital and data to understand how can you provide more effective capability to your customers. And in the Western flank, we've got organizational centric forces. This is about you looking internally and saying, do I have the right skills and appetite to be able to look at adding services to support the product? And this is where NMIS in particular play a significant role. From an advanced services group perspective, we tend to focus with working with industry in the first two boxes. And by doing so, that allows then the company, the manufacturer, to actually go on the journey in 3 and 4 themselves. We understand all of these stages. We can help at these latter stages, but it doesn't tend to be needed as much as 1 and 2. And on the eastern flank, it's all about the value network. You may find as you move along that transformation roadmap that actually some of the external environment is very valid to help you make the customer more successful. So you might find that actually in some cases competitors could actually be ones that could help you provide more value to the customer. So we provide all of these tools, the value network analysis, the storytelling analysis that helps you actually create this journey into a story that the customer can use. Next, Richard, please. So global and national, I'm just going to give you a sense of where and why we operate. I talked about our global partnership earlier on. This is our advanced services partnership. We currently have 10 global firms in there, and we tend to restrict the number because we have an environment where we can learn from these firms, and some come in and some leave again. But in the main, we have a rolling 10 global firm contract partnership that allows us to share the latest research with them. So we get together 3 times a year. We refer to them as round tables, which is back for beginning of March there from Lund in Sweden. We were out at Tetra Pak for 3 days. In May, we're off to Omron in Barcelona. So we take our partners round the member sites to allow them to see their manufacturing capabilities, but also how they are using digital and how they are providing new services. And we provide the latest research and the models and the frameworks to these firms to allow them to accelerate their own journey. And we provide a dedicated relationship manager to them. So in this context, I provide support to Tetra Pak, so I look after them globally, but it's much more of a mentoring role that we provide. It's really about helping them get along that transformation roadmap as effectively and efficiently as we can to make sure that they can provide new services to their customers. Next, please, Richard. And some of the quotes, they are on the slide deck. I won't get into them in detail, but you see Tetra Pak believe our work to be impactful and invaluable. Nederman are a filtration company in Scandinavia. We helped them move from a cost center to a profit center. And Huisman Equipment, based mostly out of the Netherlands, we help provide a vision for services for them. So you can see that the type of thing that we do is about enabling them to do something different rather than just purely think about the product or the asset. Next, please. I've shared this one because this was some Innovate UK funding that I'd secured. We collaborated with Baxi, the heating company. We submitted a bid to Innovate UK's Manufacturing Made Smarter programme back in 2018, I think, early 19. And we secured 1.6 million in total for the project. So we had a mix of government grant, we had private sector match. You'll see there that we had Innovate, we had the digital catapult, one of the catapults that Richard mentioned earlier in the high value manufacturing catapult family. They helped us actually develop the digital capabilities. We had 2 large industries, so we had Siemens involved and we had Baxi involved. And we had 3 business schools. We had Oxford Brookes, we had Exeter, and we had Aston. And we had 4 SMEs. So we had the Advanced Services Group themselves, plus Cool Mill, UV Light, and the digital company that created the cybersecurity. So we worked with them and we tested models. We focused on delivering heat as a service And if you go to the next slide, Richard, please, you'll see that we actually created a physical centre at Baxi in Warwick. We called it originally for the contract, it was the digital servitization demonstrator. But we find as we build conversations with firms, it's really much more about a servitization experience. So the space has some top left, some panels. We had lots of pilot testing. We had 220 learning points that helped us understand what we needed to have there. You'll see there's a 75-inch interactive screen in the middle where we have all our animations and our learning tools and frameworks, where we actually create the business models with the firms. Currently, we're working with some waste firms and the NHS. They're looking to do a lot on sustainable and circular economy practice, so we're working with them. And you'll see the bottom, particularly the second from the right, is where we actually had a boiler connected to show the digital connectivity. We had the rice mill connected, and we had an air compressor connected, showing some open source sensors that didn't have to be large scale MindSphere type software services such as the ones that Siemens provide. Next, please. Access to resources, again, next please. We have lots of case studies, large companies from global, from lots of different sectors. Again, if you contact the team at NMIS, if you've got particular interest in any sector or type of activity, then please let them know and we'll provide these for you. Next please, Richard. I wanted to just bring out maybe some of the examples of the smaller firms. I mentioned the one on the right earlier, the helping the firm that made the remanufacturing of the recycling equipment, help them with that weapon surrender management service. And you'll see the type of weapons that were taken off the West Midlands streets, phenomenal. You know, if you think in very harsh terms, for every death, it costs government and associated services about £1 million per death. So if you think that they've taken over 1,300 weapons off the streets, you think that the value that we've created to society. The one on the left, this is a sustainable bike company. They've assessed the market to understand that most children need 8 different bikes by the age of 12 because of the growing cycle. And what they've done is they've made bikes available at £3.49 a month. So they provide the bike, so they're providing the asset, they're changing it, they're repairing it, they're maintaining it, making sure that this is optimum condition, and the child gets a new bike at every growing stage. And all they do is pay £3.49 a month. So the company gets stacking of recurring revenues, makes them very robust and resilient, gives them great cash flow. And you'll see the carbon and the net zero and sustainability contributions that they've made. So they've saved over 1,100 tons of CO2 by providing these bikes and recycling these bikes as you would with the different ages. Next, please, Richard. Some of the larger firms, Goodyear, they were one of our first global firms based in Akron, Ohio in the US. And you think, well, how can you add services to a bit of black rubber with a hole in the middle? Well, what we did with them was we understood what was the critical to them, and it was the way that the driver drove the truck. For every half a mile per gallon that they could save through driver behaviour, they got 19.6% difference to the bottom line in terms of their profits and the margins. So they introduced sensors onto the trucks and they used that to analyse the drivers, and they graded them A through to F. C tended to be a standard driver, B was rewarded, A was rewarded significantly with holidays and extra time, D and E were retrained, and F were invited to find employment elsewhere because it was so significant to the business. But the key driver was about the uptime of the rig. So they bought a company that manufactured and created a drive-over tyre reader. So if you picture a truck in a yard before it leaves, there was a green light on one wall and a red light on the other. And the rig ran over the tyre reader that checked for tears in the tyres, tyre pressure, tyre temperature. And if everything was okay, the green light went on and the truck hit the road. If there was any concern, the red light went on and it turned round. It was all about making sure that it didn't break down on the journey, because what really mattered to the customer was uptime of the asset. And you'll see there, Baxi, we won't be allowed to put boilers in new build homes from 2025, sorry, 2015, sorry, 2025, because of legislation. And we've got an environment now that we're moving towards these air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. But the barrier is the high cost of them. I got a quote for one and it was £19,000. So I spent 2,000 on a new boiler. It was a far better equation for me, but not necessarily beneficial in the longer term. But that's what they're doing. So they're moving from CapEx to OpEx. So they're providing heat as a service and managing all that system for the integrator and the end user. And Nederman, we helped him understand the key sustainable development goals, and we helped move them from being a filter company to a clean air company. That was what mattered to the customers. Next, please, Richard. Again, some examples there. I can go through in more detail and send them at a later date, but CARE, the one on the left, provide air conditioning in Singapore. They actually take responsibility for the water payment and the electricity consumed. So they're taking these pains away from the customer, because as the designer of the air conditioning units, they know how to optimize them, and they can guarantee a monthly fee for the provision of cooling within office blocks. They were very fortunate when COVID struck. People were no longer in office blocks, but what they were able to do was they took advantage of all the coolers and put them into data centers, because people were working from home and they had to cool down all these data points. So again, you'll see extended life, the 15:7 ratio I've got there. Traditionally, they would give their asset a 15-year guarantee. But what they found was by maintaining it and providing the capability, they were able to add a second life. So take the asset away from government or the office block and putting it back into the second market for another 7 years. Coolmill, we've talked about the 90% savings. The one on the right is a jeans company. They provide jeans by the month. And you'll see there they've avoided almost 62,000 pairs of jeans going to landfill, which equated to just over 824,000 of CO2 over a 6-year period. So everyone is thinking about how do they take their asset, make it available to the customer, provide it in a way that it's easy to do, and how can they wrap services around it to add more value. So these are just some of the leading examples, but I can provide more if there's a particular sector that you might be interested in. Next, please, Richard. And again, a partnership, I'll skip over that. That's just when we were in Thales and Paris, Tetra Pak and Lund, and some of the other activities. Skip over, please, Richard. This is a copy of the business model blueprint that I mentioned earlier. It's freely available, businessmodelblueprint.co.uk. We make it available because we want companies to engage with it and to use the research, because it creates impact. And you'll see on the left there, it just mimics the 4-quadrant, the value proposition, the delivery system, the revenue capture, and the competitive advantage. And all the questions and prompts are there. You can easily log on, complete your own blueprint, and use that as an internal communication tool. Next, please, Richard. And I think some of the links are there, and I think that brings us nicely just to the 15 minutes for Q&A, Richard, and Debbie and Laura.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was some really informative case studies you presented there. It was really fascinating to see how these servitization principles have been applied to some businesses out there already. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any questions at the moment in the chat area, but if anyone wishes to ask a question verbally to our speakers, feel free to raise your hand.
Okay, in the meantime, is there anything else you would like me to delve into, Richard, or maybe provide some examples?
Not at the moment, Ian. I think there's been a fair bit that's been covered today from different sectors and different types of manufacturers as well, and how they're diversifying their capability into different areas. I think what would be good to explore going forward is looking at the challenges of sustainability within manufacturing. I think is going to be the big challenge, and how the more intensive processes like forming and forging, could be exploring, these types of challenges in this type of way.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Richard. I think I'm seeing a move towards using sustainability as a way to understand how the business model might change. So last month I was over in Dublin at the National Sustainability Summit, and I opened one of the stages on waste resource and management. And they had 1 day event with over 1,150 delegates from Ireland, from the UK, from Europe, coming in to see how firms can be more sustainable, how they can support circular economy practice. If you think of perhaps those that are more familiar with circular economy, you've got the Ellen MacArthur model, where the right-hand side is all about the reuse, the repurposing, the replenishment of the asset and giving it more life and extended life. The left-hand side is much more about the recovery of the raw material. Changing the business model can actually have a significant effect on that right-hand side. And by doing so and understanding the asset in use, by using that digital feedback, you can actually redesign the asset to use fewer of the raw materials that would be reclaimed on the left-hand side. So it's a win-win as far as we're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a couple of people on the chat box now, Ian.
Okay.
Harneet has said, with most companies focused on cost cutting and immediate revenue challenge, how many firms are actually interested in and actually pursuing such longer term digitisation initiatives?
Okay, great question. Out of the 450 firms that I've been involved with since 2012, only 2 firms have not had any benefit from our work. One, because it was a lifestyle business. The company was family, 3rd generation. They owned the factory site. They made aftermarket seats for minibuses. They had no desire to grow the business. They were very comfortable as they were. It was just a lifestyle business. The other one, the owner of the firm, just did not see a way to add services to support the product. Whereas the rest have found a way to engage and think about their customer. So about 90% of my time is spent turning executive boards and heads 180 degrees. So stop thinking about the product and start thinking about the customer. And I recognize the challenge in these kind of cost-cutting times. Many of the businesses that we worked with have come to us because their backs have been against the wall. They've got to the point that they can't grow the market share. They are being pushed by competitors offering lower cost products from Asia, the Far East. So they've got no other option but to say, right, let's just try this. One company that was in that position was a company that actually made, believe it or not, incinerators for animal waste. And what we did was we turned their business model on its head by getting their customers to not pay when the asset was being used. It sounds counterintuitive, but they were paying a recurring fee when they weren't using the asset, but when they were using it, when they were also consuming their own energy costs, they weren't having to pay for the incinerator. So that actually made a significant difference to the business. So it's really just about exploring ways and just taking time to think about other ways that we could perhaps move from CapEx to OpEx. We find in doing so that you tend to involve third-party financiers, and they will provide you with the payment to allow you to provide your asset on a monthly or quarterly basis. Some of the financing firms out there at the moment, you've got RealAR is a very successful one. You've got people like DLL in the Netherlands, although they operate globally. You've got other ones like Siemens Finance. A lot of the major firms have got captive banks within their own organizations. So it's actually a lot easier to move into these outcome-based services or to start to provide your assets as a capability than you think.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. And I hope that answers the attendee's question. And we've got another one just popped in from Hugh. Do you have any observations regarding which sectors, industries are progressing the quickest? And if is there anything noteworthy about how different sectors are approaching this differently from each other? He works in oil and gas in the northeast of Scotland, so curious as to how oil and gas in the northeast of Scotland compares.
Okay, so let me answer the first part first then, Debbie. We tend to find that we get a lot of traction in the equipment processing area. We tend to find HVAC is very engaged, so heating, ventilation and air conditioning. We tend to find that aerospace is better than automotive. Automotive tends to be restrained by QCD, i.e. quality, cost and delivery. So the quality is expected, the delivery is expected, and the variable is cost. That's very difficult for somebody in that supply chain to start to take responsibility for providing the asset in a different way. We find it more readily available and adopted within the aerospace sector, where you've got perhaps a lot more traceability systems and you can provide longer term relationships because you have a much longer term asset. In terms of oil and gas, you are in an area where you've got lots of high value equipment. We've got things like compressors, you've got electrical generators. I know Agreco are one of the partners, I think, that are on this call today. You've got a lot of that supply chain in the oil and gas sector could actually provide you with advanced services to allow you to concentrate on your core operations. So we tend to think that servitization is unidirectional, that we're providing just something to a customer. But in actual fact, your supply chain and further back in your tier 2, tier 1, tier 3, etc., they can actually provide more and more value to you as maybe an OEM that allows you to provide more value to your customer in turn. So that tends to be when we use a lot more of the value network analysis to undertake that. But we have examples. One of the companies that supplies the oil and gas sector was a company called MNB Precision, and we helped them reduce the lead time in their operations by 87%. So there's a case study I have from 2013-14. They have just recently won the King's Award for Industry. So they were an SME and we turned them round, but the MD and the operations director said in a quote a couple of years later that their business changed the day that they came and left our program. They came on a 2-day program, and when they get into their car, their business changed because they started thinking about the customer. And that's been a huge success and a phenomenal growth story. But again, their supply chain into the oil and gas sector. Anything else, Debbie?
That's great, Ian. Thanks very much. No, I think that's all the questions that we've got for the moment. Hugh's just actually typing in at the moment, so I hope that maybe just answered his question okay. But we've just popped our email address into the chat box, so obviously if anyone has any questions afterwards, they can get in touch with us via the NMIS inquiries. So is that everyone okay? Richard, have you got anything else you would like to say before we wrap up?
Just say thank you to Ian for joining us today and presenting and providing that knowledge into servitization and manufacturing. And just thanks to everybody for attending today.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Debbie, maybe one thing worth adding, Richard. We have that servitization experience room in Baxi in the West Midlands, but we are also talking to Richard about providing that capability at NMIS. We're also talking to the National Composite Centre in Bristol about doing the same. And I know that the high value manufacturing team in Birmingham also want to have one in their HQ. So again, we're very, very happy to explore how working with NMIS we can provide support to manufacturing firms in Scotland.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you. Just like to say thanks very much to everyone for joining us today, and thank you again to Ian and Richard. And we'll just bring the webinar to a close for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Cheers.